Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today I wanted to have another little artist chat about something that I've seen quite a few times over the last few weeks, which is probably just how the things I have been seeing has been working out, but it was interesting to me anyway, so I thought we could talk about it a little bit today and have a little bit of an art conversation. So we are going to talk about the hierarchy of art, or art that is deemed more important than other art and mediums. I have been using Libby to read art magazines for free through our library, and as I was reading them, I noticed most are focused on certain art mediums, either entirely or mostly oil paintings, with a few acrylic artists as well, the exception so far being a plein air magazine which has a lot more watercolor in it, but even that magazine with its focus on creating outdoors still has a lot of oil paintings in it and a lot of oil artists. Of course, there can be a lot of reasons for that, but it made me think about how certain art forms are considered more serious or professional, and how exhibitions usually include only certain styles or mediums. There is often an unspoken hierarchy of art mediums, with oil paint being better than acrylic, acrylic better than ink, ink better than watercolor, and on and on. Recently, digital art is the worst and is considered the least serious by many people, with a lot of people not realizing that most digital artists started with pencil or some other traditional medium, if not every single digital artist. And it does take a lot of time to complete digital art, and you still have to have the basic foundations of art to be able to create digital art. Today I want to focus mainly on traditional fine or visual art mediums such as painting and drawing. Obviously, sculpting and composing, film and photography, digital art, and many other categories are still considered art, but to compare every single art form in this video would take way too long, so we're not going to do that today, and we're just going to stick to the more traditional mediums. One of the first things that I did was start doing some research for this video, and I actually made a script today, so that was different than what I usually do. But one of the first things that I did when I started thinking about this topic was do a little bit of reading on some art history, and the first thing I wanted to talk about was how does art history change our perspective of what true or serious art is? One of our earliest examples of oil paint is from the 7th century, with oil paints being first introduced in Europe around the 11th century where they were used on wood. Then in the 15th century it became a staple of the Renaissance, and improvements to the oils and solvents made it a lot more popular and commonly used with famous artists of the time. Watercolor painting is possibly one of the most ancient art forms. It has been used in China, Korea, and Japan with ink brush and scroll paintings. Watercolor in the way that we recognize today also emerged during the Renaissance and Baroque periods as a sketch, copy, or study in preparation for real art. In the 1490s, modern watercolors were created, but most artists still used them in a limited way, such as tinting other works. Then, in the 1800s, artists moved from tinting works with watercolor to capturing atmosphere, such as clouds in the sky. This is commonly known as the Romantic style. I do have some links below with the different art and watercolor specifically history, and some of the sites that I got this information from, so if you want to read more, you can always check it out down there, because this is of course a very brief overview. Moving on to acrylic paint, they were first developed in 1934, commonly used in the 1940s, and then by the 1960s they were widely used by artists. They dry faster, bond to more surfaces, and are water-based, so a lot of artists preferred those characteristics, especially for what is now known as pop art, such as Andy Warhol and other artists of his time. Oil paints do tend to have higher pigment loads and allow for more time to blend colors, so the difference between oil and acrylic really just comes down to what the artist prefers, and sometimes what they're painting. Traditionally, oil paints have been considered the most professional and tend to be most well received at galleries and museums. You can see this with a lot of art history and what historical art pieces are displayed. And from the perspective of longevity, that does make sense, because without any modifications, they are likely to be the most long-lasting or color-fast medium. Even the most light-fast watercolors typically will need to be coated with something that will help them be UV resistant if they are going to be exposed to sunlight for long periods of time. So at museums or galleries, often the glass will have UV resistance built into it. Leaving behind the historical and technical aspects of this conversation, as I was reading these things and thinking about them and kind of just planning for this video, it made me think of how often we think of oil painting as the superior or the best medium simply because of how long it takes. and how that can affect people's thought process. If we are sitting here thinking, oh, this takes so long, this artist took a month to finish this painting, and thinking that means that they put more skill or more effort into it. But the thing is, oil painting and the length of time that it takes has nothing to do with the artists themselves and is simply based on the materials. You cannot force oil paint to dry super fast like you can with other mediums, and that's not a good or a bad thing, that's just how oil paint is. But it made me wonder if we equate the amount of time taken on a piece with its value and how that affects how we look at artwork. Historically, certain mediums like graphite, pencil, and watercolor were used for studies or just quick drawings that would later be taken back to an artist's studio and used as a reference for what was considered a real artwork, which would be an oil painting typically. I think that definitely has affected how we can still look at art today and see pencil artwork and think, oh, well, that must not take as long, even though it can take a very long time. And I have seen some amazing artists create super detailed pencil work with just plain graphite and with colored pencils. I don't think any one medium is better or worse than another medium, which I'm sure you've noticed throughout this video. Every medium has upsides and downsides depending on what you're wanting to create, how long you want it to last, how easily you can transport it, all of those things. And every medium is chosen usually for a specific quality, whether that's the opacity, the brightness of the colors, how long something takes to dry and allows you to blend better, the ease of travel. Any of those things can and often are a very large factor in why people choose the medium that they do. And I think we just need to remember that just because historically one medium might be looked at as a more proper or official or professional medium doesn't necessarily mean that it is. Ultimately, the artist is the one who is responsible for their own abilities, not the medium. And I think sometimes when we hold too strongly to this supposed hierarchy of art and what mediums are superior mediums, that it can often limit us in the artists that we will follow, the work that we will appreciate, and the inspiration that we will draw from those artists. Because sometimes we can see an artist and say, well, they use whatever medium that it is that we think is less professional, so we think that we can't have anything to learn from them, or that they cannot be an inspiration to our artwork. Any artist, even if they do not create in a medium that we create in, can still be an inspiration to us and can be a challenge to us to improve our artwork. Every artist is working with the same basic principles, so even if you only create with acrylic paint, you can still see someone that creates with pencil and see areas that they are way better at their shading or at their textures, and you can find ways to incorporate those into your own artwork even if you aren't necessarily creating in the same way. And I think when we stick too strongly to this art hierarchy that may be historically rooted, may be rooted in the ways that the mediums are often used, it can still limit us and keep us from improving. And I think that it's just more important for us to look for ways that we can improve, even if maybe it's not necessarily a way that we would expect or our favorite medium, but to know that we can still use those as inspiration and ways to improve our own art. Ultimately, no one medium is a shortcut to creating a piece that looks right or good. An artist still has to know how to use shape, texture, and color to create good art, so using oil paint doesn't automatically make you good at blending, even though they are sometimes easier to blend. Painting with acrylics doesn't automatically make you good at choosing colors. Drawing digitally doesn't mean that the shapes are created with perfect angles and perspective for you, and it doesn't mean that you don't have to try. All mediums do require practice, learning basic techniques, and constant improvement. That is definitely one thing that I want to point out very clearly in this video. We may think that because one medium is deemed as better historically, or is more often shown in professional or gallery or museum settings, doesn't necessarily mean that that is true. And instead of just assuming a certain artist or art style or even medium is better because of that history, we can appreciate the history and appreciate all of that information about the mediums while still understanding that every single artist ultimately has to practice and has to learn to be able to create the way that they do with any of the mediums that they use. So basically the short version of this entire video is We might think that a certain medium is better or superior than other mediums just because of art history, but that's not necessarily the case. And whatever medium you enjoy consuming or creating with can still be used to create amazing and beautiful art. And I think that we should keep that in mind when we are looking at museums or art magazines or things like that. And just appreciate the beauty of the art and the skill used to create it, regardless of what medium it is. I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic, whether that is some historical artists that you love, modern artists that have inspired your artwork and your style, your favorite mediums or techniques, any of those things. I would love to hear about those, so go ahead and leave a comment below if you would like. And thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you guys next time.